Morning and welcome to our service today. When we were deciding what was going to happen this morning, Mason in particular thought it'd be very entertaining for me, named Ruth, to introduce Ruth, which is why I'm now here. I'm going to open with a verse. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." It's the verse that I was named after, and it's a verse that I pretty much get in my birthday card every year from my mother. So I thought it'd be a good way to start the service.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So as you know, we're going to cover the topic of Ruth today. It's quite a short book, actually, in the Bible. There's only 4 chapters. So I'm going to kind of unpack each chapter very quickly. The book itself is set after the book of Judges, where Israel conquers the land of Canaan after leaving Egypt, but then they struggle to live up to their covenant with God. So it's quite interesting, actually. This book doesn't directly discuss God, but it's more about the relationships of people, but God is woven throughout. So as we look at the different chapters, there's some key characteristics which we'll unpack. So they are loyalty, sacrifice, obedience, and kindness. Okay, so let's start with chapter 1. So the story follows the family of 4 people. So you got Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilian. So at the time, there was a famine in Bethlehem, so they moved to Moab. So the Moabites, interestingly, actually tried to curse Israel as they journeyed from Canaan to Egypt, and God had actually banned them from his assembly. So in Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 3, it says,
"No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of God, not even in the 10th generation."
So Elimelech actually taken his family out of the promised land, Bethlehem, and actually move into Moab, was actually quite controversial. So we'll see how that plays into the story. When they actually get there, it doesn't say how long passes, but eventually Elimelech dies, and that leaves Naomi with her 2 sons, and they actually marry 2 women called Orpah and Ruth. After 10 years then, both of her sons die, so she's left then with just her daughters-in-law. So Naomi hears that the Lord had began providing food again in Bethlehem, so the 3 prepare to leave Moab. Naomi actually urges Ruth and Orpah, now her 2 daughters-in-law, to go back to their hometowns. They're from Moab, they're not from Bethlehem. She encourages them to stay. So then they all have a big cry, and that's the Josh translation of the Bible, but they all have a big cry, and Ruth and Orpah actually offer to return to Bethlehem with Naomi. But Naomi once again urges them, go home. She's far too old. She's not going to find a new husband. And even if she did, they wouldn't, her sons wouldn't grow up in time to then become husbands for Ruth and Orpah. So, she's got nothing to offer them in that sense. So she's quite bitter at this time, and she actually changes her name to Mara, which means bitter, from Naomi, which actually means pleasant. And that's quite significant in the Bible. Names mean a lot to people. So she actually changes her name. So they all have another big cry, and eventually Orpah kisses her goodbye, but Ruth actually clings to Naomi. And the Hebrew word for clung is actually the same word used to describe a marriage relationship. So then Ruth, chapter 1, verses 16 to 17 says,
"But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.'"
Yeah, so Ruth was prepared to kind of follow Naomi right until the death. Jesus actually says in the New Testament, in John chapter 15, verse 13,
"Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends."
So here we see Ruth's loyalty clearly displayed, and she shows sacrificial love to Naomi. She's willing to trade in her own life, her own God, customs, vowing to be by Naomi's side instead. So Ruth was actually kind to Naomi by giving up her old life as far as she knew, prospects of another husband and family, instead choosing to follow Naomi, who was struggling. Even though Naomi had obviously suffered her own disappointments and bereavements, Ruth was still willing to give up her life to follow Naomi's God. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? So even though Naomi's God kind of, Ruth's way of looking at it could have been that, God was kind of punishing Naomi or something, that this was a vengeful God. But actually, it's something we can learn from. Naomi's relationship with God must have stood out to Ruth, because Naomi's faith remained, even though she'd been through all these tough times, and we're called to do the same. So even though it's not always easy, we need to show the same loyalty and faith to God, to the point that it stands out as an example to those around us. So back to the story. Even after witnessing Ruth's determination, Naomi eventually gives in, and the two then travel to Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. I think it's important to note that we discussed this as our group on Thursday, but it's the quality of our relationships which is important, not the quantity. I think we can be tempted, especially with social media and everything like that, to kind of accumulate as many friends as we can, but it's actually the quantity of the friendship which is important. In the story, Ruth and Naomi at this point only had each other. Their husbands had died. Orpah had left as well, so it was just the two of them, but it was such a strong friendship that we'll see how the story unfolds. But yeah, it was the strength of that friendship, not the quantity of their friendships, that took them through. And the chapter isn't really about how to find a Ruth, but more how to be a Ruth. So obviously Ruth is a great character in the Bible, shows this loyalty and self-sacrificing love, and that's the kind of friend we'd all want. But it's not a chapter about, okay, who in our lives resembles a Ruth, who do we need to stay close to because they're a Ruth. It's more about how can we be a Ruth to others. And you know what, Ruth didn't stick around because there was actually something in it for her. It was completely selfless. She didn't really have a lot to gain. She was still young. She could have quite easily found a new husband, but she stuck with Naomi anyway. And you know what, our world can sometimes treat relationships in the same way we treat telephone contracts. As long as the deal is good for us, we're happy to stick around. Okay, chapter 2 now. So Naomi actually has a relative of her late husband, and his name is Boaz. So this is where we meet the character of Boaz. So Ruth has this idea. She's going to go to the fields and try and pick up any leftover grain, which is known as gleaning. But reading online, this is kind of the modern day equivalent of dumpster diving. So she was literally roaming the fields looking for anything that was left that they could collect just as the scraps. But as it turned out, the field she was working in actually belonged to Boaz. So then one day Boaz greets the harvesters and he says, "The Lord be with you." And he notices Ruth in the field. So his overseer informs Boaz that she's actually a Moabite who came with Naomi, and she's been working all day apart from a short rest. So we read in Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 to 12.
So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women and work for me. Watch the fields where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favour in your eyes that you will notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge."
Yeah, so here in this verse we hear about Boaz's kindness. He allows Ruth to glean in the field, and making sure there's more enough food for her. And even though she was an immigrant, and he was obviously much wealthier than her, this was all against cultural norms as well. So eventually Ruth, she comes home to Naomi, and Naomi asked where she'd been all that day, as she brought back so much food. And then Ruth revealed it was Boaz, and Naomi was overjoyed. So we read in Ruth 2, verse 20.
"The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He's not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers."
So yeah, the term guardian redeemer, it basically means someone who's a close, influential relative. whose members of the extended family could turn to for help. So it was usually when the family line or possessions were in danger of being lost. This person was responsible for buying back family land, sold during the crisis, buying back enslaved relatives, providing an heir for a dead brother, avenging the killing of a relative, caring for relatives in difficult circumstances. Basically, a jack of all trades when it comes to looking after the family line and the members of the family. So the term guardian redeemer actually finds its ultimate fulfillment in the coming of the Messiah. So Jesus is our guardian redeemer who came to buy us back into God's family. And in the New Testament, the concept is actually reflected in various words for redeem, which suggest like paying a ransom, making a purchase, or saving from loss. So over to chapter 3, which begins with verses 1 to 6.
One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for. Now Boaz, whose women you've worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do.
Yeah, so when I first read this, I had to kind of reread it. I thought, this is a strange practice. Is this some kind of weird seductive act of the time? But yeah, actually laying down at someone's feet was actually a cultural gesture of submission rather than anything. It was something that a servant would do. They would lay at their master's feet, literally waiting for the next command. So this is just Ruth's way of showing submission towards him. Naomi gave Ruth some clear directions on how to act towards Boaz, and Ruth was completely obedient to this, not questioning at all. I'm just wondering, do we show the same obedience to God when he reveals his plans to us? Do we question it, or do we continue forward trusting him? Naomi actually advised Ruth to be humble as well, so displaying the posture of a servant when approaching Boaz, and she actually did this, making herself vulnerable. How can we have a heart like Ruth? God's ways can seem different to ours, and it can be hard to be obedient. But the book of Ruth shows how eventually this will pay off. It's interesting as well, because even though Ruth had every right to play the victim, so she obviously lost her son, she'd lost her husband, Naomi had lost her sons, lost her husband. Ruth, also a victim, had just lost her husband. She could have, expected Boaz to marry her as the guardian redeemer and been, more forthcoming in that sense. But instead, she presented herself as a humble servant, laid at his feet, and was instead trusting in Boaz's kindness as her guardian redeemer. So then we read in verse 9 how Ruth followed these instructions.
"Who are you?" he asked. "I'm your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you're a guardian redeemer of our family."
Yeah, so spreading the corner of your garment over me, since you are the guardian redeemer of our family. So I had to do a bit of reading on this. It actually spreading the corner of the garment, or some translations, the Bible says, spreading your wings instead. This was actually a cultural way of saying, like, I'm a widow, will you take me as your wife? Will you spread your garment over me, or your wing over me? And that might seem quite forward to like approach someone at night and say, I'm a widow, will you take me as your wife? But actually, as Boaz is the guardian redeemer, this isn't really a weird thing to do. It's not considered too forward or anything. So then in chapter 3, verses 10 and 11.
"The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for all you ask. All the people of my town know that you're a woman of noble character."
So yeah, Boaz mentions his age here. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. I think this is key because it actually shows that Ruth's kind of attraction to Boaz is not on kind of the way he looks and his age, just more on the fact that she respected him more than anything else. Boaz also comments on Ruth's integrity, saying she's a woman of noble character. And it's interesting because when we obey God and we live this kind of life, people actually will notice those characteristics in us, and we will be like questionable people to them. Boaz eventually accepts her request, but twist, there is another guardian redeemer who's actually more closely related to Ruth. So, as was the custom, he had the right to claim her first. And we read this in verses 12 and 13.
Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another who is more closely related than I am. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning.
So in the morning, Boaz gives her a gift of barley, and she heads home to Naomi. And now Naomi and Ruth have to sit tight and find out whether Ruth's going to marry Boaz or this other guardian redeemer. So now, chapter 4, the final chapter, Boaz at the start meets with the other guardian redeemer at the city gate in front of some of the elders of the town. He explains to him how Naomi is selling Elimelech's land, so her late husband's land. And initially, the other guardian redeemer accepts. So this is quite crafty of Boaz. He kind of draws him in talking about how Naomi's selling the land. But then in verses 5 and 6, he says,
Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you will also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it.
Yeah, so Boaz is quite crafty. He kind of lures him in with the land and then mentions, oh, also you have to kind of take this guy's wife as well. So the guardian redeemer said, I can't do it. I've got kind of my own personal things going on. It's fine. You can redeem it. I'm not doing it. So then they exchange their sandals, which again sounds like a bit of a weird custom, but it was a tradition in legalizing transactions. So the two of them swap sandals, and then Boaz officially redeems Ruth in verses 13 to 17.
So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Yeah, so here we see at the end, bitter Naomi was now blessed with a grandson whom she could nurse. And this is like far from the bleak outlook in chapter 1, where she's in a strange land, her sons have just died, her husband has just died, and she actually changes her name to Bitter. She's so upset at the current situation. So yeah, at the end of the story of Ruth and Naomi, we see how God had turned everything around. Naomi, who was once bitter, is now blessed and happy. And this relates to us as we sometimes go through hard times and can't see a way out or see how God is working in us, but God is always there and always has a plan. Even though she was in pain at the start, mourning, and she felt that God had wronged her, she still didn't stop believing, and she wanted to go back to Bethlehem, to God's land. And then the book finally ends with the genealogy of David. So we see how Ruth and Boaz's son, Obed, was King David's grandfather. And then obviously Jesus was a descendant of King David. It shows how the small decisions we make can have a big impact on, generations down the line. Christ was born through Ruth's lineage. And actually the reason Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem for Jesus's birth in the census was because of David's roots there. So I just want to leave you with 3 thoughts as we end. It can be hard to surrender to God's plan, but always beneficial to do so. We see how Ruth and Naomi were both blessed and richly rewarded by the end of the story, and how they played a key part in actually Jesus's life and our ultimate redemption. So this week I urge you, pray into God's plans for you and for guidance to make the right choices in life. How often do we have ideas that don't always go to plan, but we look back and we saw how God was working through them? So this week, reflect on a difficult time in your life and think of how at the time you didn't realize, but God was present throughout. And then what does it mean to be a Ruth in modern society? To be loyal, to be obedient, kind, and ultimately a good friend when you haven't really got anything to gain from it. So think of someone you know this week and try and make a conscious effort to show them the same selfless love that Ruth showed Naomi, and that be a person, a questionable person, show these kind of characteristics to people. So yeah, just those three things: pray into God's plan for you, reflect on a time which was difficult, and you didn't realize, but God was present throughout, and then think of someone you know and try and be a Ruth to them. So thank you all for listening today, and God bless you.